Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Watchung Booksellers Podcast, where we bring you conversations from our bookstore's vast community of book professionals who talk about what they do for the love of books. Thank you, as always, for joining us. I'm Catherine, here with my co-producer, Marnie. Hello, Marnie.
Hello.
And we're very glad to be back in the saddle for Season 4 of the podcast.
Hello, everyone. We are so glad to be back. And if you heard our trailer last week, you'll know we're bringing a few changes your way. We're going to add a little breathing room in between episodes, and we're planning to add more book discussions with some of our writers, and we're going to start a book club.
That's right. We are going to talk about the book next month on our Substack page, where you can also find additional content about authors who have been on the show and news about what's coming up in the store. And I'm excited to announce that the pick this month is Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood. I am about to finish it right now, and it is just freaking me out. It's so good, but it offers a lot to talk about. So I think it'll be a great pick. And next week, it will be available in paperback, so you could drop by the store and pick it up.
But now let's talk about today's episode. We're excited to share this talk with you between authors Cleyvis Natera and Erika Morillo. They talk about translation and how they approach multilingual writing. Both are writers, and Erika translated Cleyvis's latest novel, The Grand Paloma Hotel.
Cleyvis Natera is the author of Neruda on the Park. She was born in the Dominican Republic, migrated to the United States at 10 years old, and grew up in New York City. She holds a BA from Skidmore College and an MFA from New York University. Her writing has won awards and fellowships from the International Latino Book Awards, PEN America, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the Kenyon Review's Writers' Workshops, the Vermont Studio Center, the Hermitage Artist Retreat, Rowland Writers Retreat, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She is currently a Fulbright Specialist. She lives with her husband and 2 young children in Montclair, and The Grand Paloma Resort is her second novel.
And Erika Morillo is a writer, photographer, and translator born and raised in the Dominican Republic and based in Jersey City. Her work focuses on family narratives, identity, and the possibilities of image text publications. Her photographs have been published and exhibited nationally and internationally, and her books are in the library collections at the Whitney Museum of American Art, MoMA Archives, the Met, and the International Center of Photography, among others. She has taught workshops at the Center for Book Arts, International Center of Photography, Columbia University, Chavon School of Design, and Dominican Writers Association. She holds an MA in Sociology from the New School for Social Research and an MFA from Image Text Ithaca, now Image Text MFA at Cornell University.
Enjoy the conversation, and we'll be back after to fill you in on what's coming up in the store.
Hello, Erika.
Hola, Cleyvis.
It is so good to be here at Watchung Booksellers with you.
I am so happy to be in conversation with you. I have a big smile.
Yes, we're both like smiling ear to ear. So I'm Cleyvis Natera. I am a local writer here in Montclair, New Jersey. I have such a deep love for Watchung Booksellers because I've launched both of my books, Neruda on the Park and the Grand Paloma Resort here. And this bookstore is just, it has my heart. Like, I feel like every time they ask me to do anything, I'm like, yes, please ask me again. So I'm so glad to welcome you to like I feel like this is my other sala. It's like, come to my living room, come into my family.
Yeah, what a privilege and beauty to have a local bookstore. I think it's such a place of community and connecting and sharing stories.
Yeah, so. I feel like I've made so many wonderful friends just like coming to the local events. And I think we are really lucky, you know, when I think about the book banning and everything that's happening on the stage in our country and abroad, it's really kind of sobering to be in a space where like books are celebrated and where we have a community. We might not always agree on things here, but it is a community that values books. And, you know, there's so many writers here. So hopefully you'll feel very welcome today.
I already do.
So Erika and I met just last year. I first learned about you through Angie Abreu of Dominican Writers. And I remember that at the time we were looking for a translator for my book, my second book, The Grand Paloma Resort. And I had asked Angie, I was also hosting, because I work at Montclair State University, and I was hosting some events, and I wanted to host Dominican writers for an event that I was invited to moderate for the university. And so it was kind of crazy because everything happened at the same time. I had reached out to you because I wanted to bring you over to celebrate your memoir, Mother Archive. And then when I got the proofs of the list of the people that were going to be under consideration for translator for my book, you were one of the people. And I was so delighted to see your name.
It's a small world, after all, for Latino writers in the tri-state area.
So I'm just so excited to get to have this conversation with you. We're going to be talking about translations. We're going to be talking about both of our work and how we approach multilingual writing. You're also a photographer. So I thought that we could start talking a little bit about how you approach writing your own book and how you see kind of the intersection between photography, which I see as like a different means of communication, right? Or like visual storytelling, and how maybe you think about that when you're thinking about also like translation and languages and writing in multiple languages, just modes of storytelling, I guess. Like, what do you think about that when it comes to your own story?
Yeah, so I think I came to writing later as a kind of like photography was this sort of stepping stone where it is a beautiful mode of expression, but I felt that through images, I was understanding first my sensibility, the things that move me, the things I'm interested in and how I think, but it didn't provide a whole language to actually talk about my family history and the Dominican Republic, the things that I'm interested in writing about and working through. So I first started actually photographing when my son was born, when I became a single mother. In that sort of overwhelming experience of seeing yourself with a child as a young person in my early 20s, I started documenting life at home as a way to rebel and say, I'm not only a mother, like I have things to say, right?
Isn't that a struggle for all of us? It's like, don't pin me in a corner.
So I started to kind of discover my voice through that process of image making. But in being a single mother, also, there is the financial struggle. So I always had to take a lot of different jobs besides my 9-to-5. And one of those was translating. So I started, translating scripts for films, doing movie subtitles. This was before AI. And that was very hard to kind of convey language and convey humor and colloquialisms, right? So I kind of started to see the importance of understanding nuance in language. And that's kind of how I started to get my feet dipped into like writing and translating. When I was making these photographs, I was always very interested in sharing the story. So I started to make books, photo books, and I always wanted to pair the images with writing. At that time, I was studying photography, and my photography teachers were like, no, the image should sustain itself. Yeah. You shouldn't write alongside it or explain anything. But I always felt very interested in that interplay of images and text. And that's actually how this whole book came about. Because I was piecing together, trying to understand my family history and getting images from the archives in the DR, from my family history. So it was always very fragmented and pulling from multiple sources. And that was kind of my rationale behind this work. I wanted it to read as kind of how we remember, with gaps and with jumps in time. And thinking about how that kind of translates into translation, I think that varied a background that I have in photography, translation, and writing, and other things allows me to provide a different perspective to the work. In translating your book, I was really fascinated to imagine how these characters would talk and what their language would be depending on where they were. Like, how would they talk to each other versus how they talk to someone in the hierarchy at the resort that was higher up, and how we negotiate language. How do we modulate our Dominicanness? For example, in the context of the resort, when the sisters were talking to the guests versus when they were talking to each other and the peers. So, I think it all informs each other. And rather than seeing it as a kind of liability to have that kind of fractured background or history, I see it as how can I use it to enrich the translation or the writing.
Yeah, I mean, you did it so well. I mean, I think it's so interesting. And I'll just add this before I back up a little bit, because I really want to talk about your work and make a little bit of space for your experience kind of holistically as a multidisciplinary artist and a translator, because I think it's so unique and fascinating. I'm kind of fascinated by you, Erika. I'm like, I want to hang out with you all the time. Let's be friends. So, but one thing that I did want to say is that it was kind of unquestionable to me when I was offered the kind of 3 samples of the different translators. Like your translation for me stood so far apart. And I think there was this sensibility, because I think a lot of what I tried to do with my writing, I'm very much a visual learner and a visual writer. Like, I think the first sense that I can tap into when I'm writing a story is the visual. And so I just felt like there was this kind of kindredness in the way that you approach the language. And also that, which is so important to me, like I found this kind of poetic sensibility that you had, especially as it came to not translating the story at like the text level, to also, I felt like you took more care with the language to make sure that the meaning of the sentence and the meaning of the scene, that the character's personality, like you're saying, in both dialogue and their exposition, their interior thoughts, is so delicate the way that you did it. Because I felt like when I was reading your translation of my work, I was like, oh, this is what I wish I could do in Spanish, right? Like, this is what I wish I could do, because I arrived in the United States when I was 10 years old, and we didn't have bilingual education back then. You were kind of like immersed completely in English. And when I had an opportunity to study English and Spanish, I had an opportunity to like even double major in college. And at that point, I just didn't see the value anymore. I had really kind of adopted this idea that like English is first. And so even though I'm still obviously like multilingual and I'm still fluent, I certainly would not be able to write this book in Spanish with the kind of skill. And so I just felt like so thankful to you. I remember sending you a note being like, oh my God, I felt so emotional because like my mom has never read my work in Spanish. And I felt like this gift that you gave me of like writing the book in a way that I think was true to our culture, but also to our sensibility, to our humor. It was just really beautiful. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Cleyvis, for those words. And actually, I want to say that the gift was reciprocal because since I arrived into the U.S., I have been thinking in English. Actually, when I arrived here, almost 20 years ago, my English was pretty bad. When I was doing my master's degree, I was studying sociology at the New School. I remember during that first semester, one of the teachers in a psychoanalysis class I was taking, he said, I can't really understand your writing. If you don't put effort in it, like you're going to fail this class. And I'm like, I can't fail. What can I do? And he's like, just start reading in English all the time and buy the New York Times. Read it top to bottom and just highlight every word you don't understand. And this was me for months, writing these words down and then pestering my family. Can we use this word in a sentence? And they're like, oh my God, So, but by the end of the semester and by the end of the these 2 years of my master's program, my English was so much better. But that meant there was a trade-off in me kind of relinquishing or putting in the back burner my mother tongue for this in lieu of this new language. Yes. And as I started making images and also writing my memoir, I understood that I wanted to write in English and not in Spanish, because Spanish is this language or tongue that I remember the past in, whereas English feels very much like a new world and like a moving forward, the language of what's possible for me. So what I found in translating your work is that with this project, you gave me the opportunity to go back to my mother tongue, but without those emotional ties for me. So it didn't feel like a strenuous translation or hard translation to do, because we were talking about our island and people from our heritage, that maybe if I was translating into Spanish a story from a completely different country, like let's say from Russia or Europe, there would be like this double learning that needs to happen, finding the language, but also learning what the original meaning is. In this sense, I already knew what the meaning was. It was just, finding the words. So I think that's also beautiful how translation allows you to express certain things that in your own work you can't, or that you are not willing to, or don't want to, or choose not to focus on.
Yeah. Well, I love this so much. And I'm so, well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. I'll take it. I also feel like I'm so moved by what you're talking about with your book, like making the choice to write in English, because that language felt like a way of both open opportunity maybe, and also as I'm moving forward, and some kind of like opening into the future. And I think that that's especially interesting to me, because when I think about what Mother Archive does, I think about two really different stories that are happening. There's like a textual story, which is obviously told through text, in which you're really, it's memoir, is autobiography. And so you're talking about your own experience and walking us through both your childhood. Your relationship with your mother is central to the narrative, but also like your relationship with history of the Dominican Republic, your relationship with your son, motherhood, both as a child of a mother and then as you yourself become a mother. But I was really fascinated by this idea that the images, which I think the images tell a story very different from the text, of intimacy, of tenderness, which sometimes is in contradiction to the textual story. And so I want you to talk a little bit about how you came to be inspired to kind of move beyond the idea of like, sometimes I feel like we're all bound, or we feel a little bit constrained by the truth when we're telling, and you have an obligation if it's a memoir to tell the truth. But I thought that, when you started talking about the possibilities of what images, especially staged images, could do to the story, and then the tension that brings between what we're reading and then what we're seeing, I just thought that it was really fresh and new. And I hadn't ever heard anyone talk about that, bringing about that kind of tension for like, maybe what is the desire that we have as a human being, as a child, of like a complicated mother when it comes to, tapping into different modes. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, just about like how you came to this idea of telling two different stories that maybe reflect a different desire from you.
Yeah, that was, I think, a very challenging part about the book, of writing this book, that I kept coming back to, asking myself the question, is this photo going to be illustrative of the text? Is it just going to say the same thing that the text is saying? Because if it does, I don't want it in it. So I kept revisiting, and it had a lot more images. I had to actually pare it down. I made a lot more experiments with photos than the ones that appear in the book. But it's funny that you say that the images kind of contradict what is said in the text. That wasn't originally my intention, but I felt after putting it together that the image making process was very much a performance of that bond that I wish existed between my mother and I in real life, that it does not. And it was, I think, in making those images that all happened during COVID, I think we were both we were all like broken open in a way. We were much more allowed to speak from an open heart. We were feeling very vulnerable. And I think that allowed a kind of openness in that process, a generosity. So my mother allowed me to photograph her. I photographed myself with her. We were affectionate towards each other. But that is not the reality outside the void of COVID and outside that stage where the lens is and we are standing in front of it. So that brings up this whole issue of photography as deceitful, right? That sometimes...
Or like inviting a different possibility.
Yeah,
right?
or a surface onto which you project your own thinking, your own desires. So to me, photography went from, with this work, before I had photographed my son for 10 years in my project Umbral, and it was very documentary. It was daily life. It had like a fine art twist to it, but it was mostly documenting our daily life. It went from that to this place where it became more staged and performative, and the image became a placeholder for my desires, for what I wish the relationship could be. And I think when you pair that with the reality of what happened with my mother's relationship, you know, after COVID or after things went sour, that it makes it heartbreaking, because you're looking at this bond in the images that cannot sustain itself. So for me, so far, like after making this work, I haven't been inclined to make any pictures. Like I don't see a need for it right now. I think writing has replaced that need, because I'm much more upfront about what I want to say. In that way, photography was a kind of like a stepping stone, or like a masked language. And I'm looking forward to see if I can write without images, because so far I have only done image text works. The 3 books that I've published, this is my first literary book, but before this I self-published 2 photography image texts, one about my father, which is also in epistolary form. It's called All of Them, and one to my son, which is a poem dedicated to him. So looking at it, the 3 of them have been letters to my father, my son, and my mother, but they're all been with images. So now I'm in this process of like, I have no images. How can I just let the writing provide the images without seeing the photograph?
Yeah. I mean, as a lover of books, welcome. I'm very happy to I'm very happy that your impulse right now is to lean more heavily in the language, because I did feel that the fragmentary style of Mother Archive, when it comes to the sections of the book that are written, is just so moving. And I think that you're already working at such like a high level as a storyteller, that I think that it lends itself to, you know, longer form, and it lends itself to the excavation of different issues. I'm also so excited to hear that you're like now looking at working with fiction. I know we talked about that a little bit, maybe before we started this conversation. And, you know, I love all modes of storytelling, and I do love nonfiction, but my first love has always been fiction. And so anytime that I can kind of like, that's what I do with all my students. I'm always like, yes, but can you write a novel? Just because I love longer stories, and I love short stories too. But anyway, I'm just so excited to hear that that, you know, you feel this impulse to nestle in language and in stories. And who knows? I mean, maybe the impulse to come back into the images will come back later.
Yeah, like I always try to like obey when I feel I'm not drawn to something. I don't like to force it. Like, well, writing is different. You kind of have to sit and force and work through it.
Yes.
But with photography, I find that you can't force yourself to make an image, because I think that forcedness comes through. Like, to me, the process of image making is a lot about chance and about being really moved by a moment that you have to capture it. But because of like my history of not having images when I grew up, or photographs, because there was a discarding that happened, you know, after a traumatic event, there was this hunger to accumulate images and make images. And I think I've already been at it for decades. And I think that need is a little bit appeased now. I don't know for how long. But I want to talk about this process of novel writing because, as I was mentioning, that English was or is this language of what's possible. For me, fiction, it's also such an interesting and challenging form because you're not operating from what you know, from your narrative that you have so ingrained in your mind and that you repeat over and over, whatever that is. Your trauma history or I don't know, this is how I make work, this is my voice. I think with fiction, you're like heading into the unknown and you're imagining what's possible as well. So I'm very fascinated. I don't know if I'll be any good. I'm making some experiments. I'm writing, but I'm fairly new to writing, as I'm also fairly new to literary translation. So I think that's like a double-edged sword because on the one hand, you have kind of like the inexperience of a beginner. So you're learning how to do it as you go, but you also provide like a curiosity and this, joyfulness of trying to learn a new form or a new endeavor. So, yeah.
I think it's exciting too with new writers, especially people that are coming into fiction as adults. Like, I think that there's something also wild in like not having grown up bound by like an academic sensibility of language. I mean, I just like you, I came to learn language, English, largely because of reading. I mean, I was a child and I started reading a lot, and I felt so much despair because for me it felt very slow learning English, and it wasn't long. I mean, it was only a couple of years that I was struggling through learning English before I was invited to be like in advanced AP English in high school. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like silly now thinking back on it that I was so distraught at the idea that like language wasn't coming so fast as I wanted it to make friends and to communicate freely. But like you, I was invited really to this kind of deluge of language. For me, it was librarians that really like encouraged me a lot to read. When I lived in Harlem, I had these two incredible librarians, this like little white lady and this super tall. One day I'm gonna have to write like a children's book with these two people because they haunt me to this day. But it was like this really tall black man and this really short white woman, and they would always fight with each other about what book I should be reading. And mind you, I was not fully fluent yet, but they were giving me like Toni Morrison and Baldwin, which is such a gift now to be like, they saw this little 12, 13-year-old skinny girl
for you.
They were like, go for it, read the real stuff. No children's books for me. But it was just really like joyful to me because I also suspect that just like booksellers, I feel like librarians have this innate ability to read you when you walk into the room and to be like, this is what you need. Like, there must have been something in my face that was like, my life at home was rough. And I think that they were giving me these kind of books that were maps, that were guides. Yeah. And like, in some ways, like confronting something difficult in the page for me has always enabled me to look more clear-eyed and like with more courage at the world as it is. And I think that, that was such a gift for me. So I was so happy to hear about that professor that was like, if you want to get good at it, read the newspaper, read books, underline the words you don't know, look them up and learn them. Because I think that curiosity for language and for acquiring language it's something that I still do. Like, I still stumble on words I don't know, and I'll be like, "Are you kidding me?" And I'll underline them. My teacher in college, in one of my literature courses, said, like, just write the word you don't know at the back of the book. And so every once in a while, I'll go through older books, and it's kind of crazy to be like, I didn't know that word.
Oh, I love notes on books, all the marginalia. Actually, when I read, I have this small moleskin that I write the words I don't know. Most of the time I remember the words, but then when I look at the list, sometimes when you look at the words one by one, you can read like a poem a little bit, which is fun to do. Sometimes I use, hey, Google, can you tell me the meaning of this word? Can you use it in a sentence? And I like reading in a language that I don't fully master or that is still a challenge for me. And something that I've been thinking about a lot. Even if I read a lot in English, I still have thinking and syntax that is in Spanish, right? And there are parts that I feel I cannot translate necessarily into English, which is why in the book I left some of the things, I left some phrases in Spanish, and I also leaned into like not knowing how to say certain things. So sometimes that lend itself to shorter sentences. And I'm fascinated by like the language constraints of what we don't know. And that not necessarily being good at writing in English means mastering the new language. Like, how do you write in a way that embraces that broken language? For example, one book that really impacted me as a writer and as an artist was Jhumpa Lahiri's in other words, in altre parole, where, you know, she's been fascinated with Italian for a long time, and she moved to Italy to kind of learn the language and kind of self-exile into this foreign tongue. So she wrote this book in her broken Italian, and then she had a person translate it into English. So the book, side by side, you have her broken Italian and the English translation that is based on her broken Italian. So you honor those cracks and the way that language sounds differently when you don't know the words. So I love that. And that's something that I want to try to very consciously integrate into the way that I write or moving forward. Like now with my writing of this novel I'm working on, I realize I still don't like or want to do a linear structure or story. And I also realized that I don't want to tell a very long story. Like for me, brevity and like condensation is what attracts me most. And I think that's also due to my love of poetry. Like I love when, you know, with one line you can convey worlds. It's just fascinating to be in this between two languages and what that means for writing.
I love that. And, you know, I'm thinking as you're talking about Jhumpa Lahiri, because I'm also really fascinated by Jhumpa. I'm a big fan of her work and her novels. I also think that she's doing some really interesting things in nonfiction. But it's so interesting that you're talking about her exposing that fracture. Because I went to see Salman Rushdie last year. He did a talk at the New School. And one of the people in the audience asked him how he made his decision, what language he would write in, and like what he would recommend to someone. This being the questionnaire, asking like, what would you recommend to someone like me about what language I should be writing in? Or should I attempt to write in multiple languages? And Salman Rushdie said, you know, it's very rare that a writer can write well in multiple languages. So his recommendation was like kind of pick a horse and ride it. Like that's not what he said. But, you know, he was kind of like, you have to choose the language that you're best at and try to do that. And I, you know, it's so interesting because I have so much respect, right, for like Salman Rushdie, but I found myself being like, I wish we were at a bar where I could be like, sir, I disagree. Because I thought like so much of what interests me about language and the limitations of language. And obviously as writers, we're inviting readers to come along, you know, especially in fiction, we're inviting them to come into a world that they might not know and to trust us in that world. But there's like something beyond consumerism, right? Like there's something that to me is also about exposing the humanity of like trying to understand what we're living through. And sometimes that humanity really is about fracture. It is about not understanding. It is about the lack of ability to like cohesively tell a story. So when you're talking about writing and like being kind of attracted to like shorter forms and condensation and you know, your love of poetry, to me all of that seems to be linked in a way that is also questioning what is language for, you know, and and this idea that it needs to be great or you need to master it and then like tell the best stories you can, I think is also at times can be limited in like the ways in which the story itself could function or like what you're inviting people to think about as they're reading what you're writing. For me, when I was writing the Grand Paloma Resort, I remember spending a lot of time thinking about the characters, and I was really nervous at the beginning because I was like, okay, I'm writing about characters who have lived their whole lives in the Dominican Republic, which I have not. Like, I left the Dominican Republic at 10 years old. I also knew that this was a place where the language itself was very different because it was a community that was founded by like free people, right, from the United States. And this town where like the resort was built is a town that largely considers itself outside of Dominican culture, right? Like they learn English first and then they, learn Spanish. And some of that was, at the beginning of the story, we understand that was done as a way to conserve language and to conserve culture. As we get deeper into this book, we also understand that language can be a liability, right? Especially because like part of what I was interested in excavating was the history of the Dominican Republic, of the Parsley Massacre. And one of the things that I didn't do in this book was actually talk directly about the method by which, the Parsley Massacre took place. And, there's now some academics that question whether or not this, the idea that during this government-mandated massacre of Haitians in the, in 1937, most of us have heard the story that it was, the soldiers were asking Haitian people to say the word parsley. Mm-hmm. And if they couldn't say this word, they would be understood to be not Dominican, not Black Dominicans, and then they would be massacred. They would be murdered. And so there have been some academics that have said that wasn't true, that like some of those accounts weren't really like methodically happening. But you can question the fact that it was a racially motivated massacre. You can question the fact that one of the ways in which, to this day, people are identified as not being Dominicans is whether or not they speak Spanish with like a Haitian accent. And so a lot of what I was holding in my mind as I was thinking about the historical tensions of the Dominican Republic, writing about a community of people who, in order to conserve their language, conserve their safety, really, were taught English first, but then like writing the story in English as a way, right? Because for me, like Spanish isn't a way that I would have written this book, even had I been able to do it to the same level. Like just so much that I was holding in my head about like language choice. And I remember thinking really carefully about if this was a sentence that was being thought of by someone who had grown up in the Dominican Republic, how would it be different than what I am thinking of? Just as a sentence, like the syntax, like how would this be different from the way that I think as someone who grew up in the Dominican Republic until I was 10 and then came to the United States. So just this idea of like a relationship with language that's really different. And I found that like as an abstract exercise, like I could just be thinking about these things forever, like the tension between language, the way that there is a hierarchy of language. I'm always kind of fascinated by this idea of translation and how there's a hierarchy within translation, right? That like there are certain books that get translated that are held to be more important, or like, historically, you didn't see as many books translated from the Spanish, right, into like an English marketplace. There was a lot of French and a lot of, other kinds of languages that are perceived to be more literary, right? So anyway, I'm just really curious to talk to you a little bit about the process of like translating my book itself, because one of the things that you talked about was like this comfort that you came into the book with, because you were already familiar with the island. I was writing about a place where we were both born. And you were talking a little bit too about just already there's a familiarity with like who these people are. And so, one of the ways in which I think of our two books as being like, in conversation with each other, maybe like distant cousins, is that we both are really interested in thinking about how like history, and especially the history of the Dominican Republic, has affected who people are, who people perceive themselves, There's a way in which I thought, especially at the beginning of your book, when you were talking about some of the darker experiences you had as a child, where there is like kind of an embedded kind of cruelty that I think that is, that lives, I think, in all cultures, not just Dominican culture, but that for us, I think is really clearly parallel to our history, right? Like we see it alive today in the way that people behave toward each other. And so I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about the ways in which just translating this book itself, the process of translation, or whether it was easy, whether it was difficult, like the process itself, how it landed on you.
Yeah, for me, I felt that it was easy in the sense that I knew the locus and I knew like the language. So I didn't have to do that extra research to see how a Dominican would talk in this way. So that felt, easy in that way. But I think the part that was challenging was threading that line of how much of that Dominicanness the characters allow themselves to show in their Spanish. And I was thinking about that when they were talking to each other and to peers, so all the employees in the hotel, versus when they were talking to, people higher up in the resort, or they were talking to guests. So, of course, the language is a lot less Dominican and more restrained.
Yes.
The temperament is more like tight when they are talking to the guest or people higher up. And there's like an utilitarian part of it. There's like a servitude to it. We are kind of like, as is the sad reality in Caribbean islands, sometimes we are seen as this kind of employees of the island, making sure that those who are coming to the island as tourists are happy and are satisfied. And we don't want to like sometimes go very deep into what it means to be truly Dominican. So there's like this sanitized, happy version of like what a Dominican person is for someone coming from the outside. So there's like this, there's the views, there's the happiness, there's the joy, but what you bring in as an undercurrent of that history. And I want to focus specifically on the impact of history on women. Dominican women hold a lot, and they develop a kind of coraza, a kind of shell, to shelter themselves against deep misogyny that we face since we are children. And I think women develop this kind of tough exterior and character to survive that gender violence, especially women that are the age of my mom, post-war women. Were coming out of like the dissolving of a dictatorship that represented a lot of horrors. So in translating, for example, the voice of Laura, I wanted that kind of like harshness and coldness to come through, because I think that's a legacy of the country that she was born in. And that's, I think, very different in Elena, who's a much more carefree and whose crazy actions really reflect a rebellion against what is dictated to her by her culture. So I don't necessarily always agree with her choices. She could have done things in a different way, but history teaches us that in order to break certain patterns, there's a kind of bravado that needs to happen. And I think Elena's voice in that sense, in Spanish, like I wanted it to reflect that kind of recklessness and newness that she represents in the story. It was funny because sometimes I was stuck with the cadence of the sentences, especially when you are in a part where something is happening, like there's an action happening or like the plot is thickening. In English, the sentences are shorter. So when I translate it into Spanish, it's like dragged on. So I'm like, okay, how can I curtail and refine it in order to maintain the same cadence and pace to honor the story? So that were like the challenges, but I learned so much from it. And I just want to preempt this conversation by saying I am by no means an experienced literary translator. This is my first literary translation in book form. I've done translations of like art catalogs and film scripts and a lot of like health education and advertising, but this was a first. So I'm coming at it, in my opinion, as a first time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Literary
I didn't know it was the first.
Yes. And I mean, I have been working for about 15 years in other areas doing translation, but actually, I think that lends itself so well for when you're translating literature because you have different viewpoints. You know when language is too clinical or too flat.
Yes.
And I love that it happened kind of side by side as I finished writing my book because I had the experience of writing and creating language fresh in my memory. And then this project came about. And actually, after your book, a lot more opportunities have appeared. Like I just translated a graphic novel, and now I'm translating a second novel by Penguin. So it's your book was a door for me.
I'm glad to hear that.
I really thank you, Cleyvis, for giving me opportunity to kind of start this new chapter, which aligns with a very important part of my personal life, which is my empty nesting. My son just went to college.
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, thank you for saying that to me because I felt like it was, like I said, for me, it was without a question that you were the right choice to translate the book. And my editor and I, when we met to like discuss it, it was the quickest meeting we've ever had because I was like, Erika. And she was like, yeah, Erika. She's the best one. It was like, okay, bye. Like Zoom over. But it was just, you were undeniably just the perfect choice for the book. And I'm so grateful to be the first of the books. And I know there's going to be so many because you're just exceptional at it. One thing that we wanted to do before we wrapped up the conversation was to talk a little bit about what we've been reading, what we're excited about. And so I'd love to hear what you've been reading in translation, what you've been reading that's not in translation.
Yeah, it's funny because my reading in the last 6 months has taken a turn. So I said I was only going to read Caribbean women writers till the end of the year. Okay. So I had been reading as a way of like getting full of that kind of voice and that cadence. Like I wanted to absorb it, right?
Yes.
As research also for my novel, which takes place in the Caribbean. Okay. So I've been reading a lot of like Sophia Sinclair. I read her memoir, How to Say Babylon. I read Jamaica Kincaid's Lucy.
Oh my God, I have read all of her books when I was getting ready to write Laura because I was like, who's exceptional at writing complicated women? Jamaica Kincaid.
And the brevity of it.
Yes.
And also so lyrical and incantatory. I read an autobiography of my mother by her, and also Edwidge Danticat's Brother, I'm Dying.
Oh.
So I have been with that in my mind, but for some reason, as I was asked to teach a class about writing motherhood, which is happening next year in the spring, I started putting together a kind of syllabus of writing on motherhood. And I came across this book by an Irish poet called A Ghost in the Throat by Dorian Ní Grioffa. And it is the best book I read this year. It is so fascinating because she started writing it in the throes of motherhood as she had a very young child and she had 4 children under 6. And she was in like this deep domesticity. And she had also volunteered to donate breast milk. So she was in this process of like pumping her breast and producing breast milk at the same time just she was archive rummaging about this poet from the 17th century that wrote a lament. They're called keening in Irish. There are like lament to the dead. And she wrote it after her lover was murdered. So she was in this process of milk and ink, archive and home. And she couples both things. And I love like when 2 currents are happening at the same time in a book. And it's really her inhabiting the late writer's grief, but also understanding how much of herself she wants to give in her process of motherhood. It is fantastic. And just at the sentence level, a beautiful writer. So I really recommend it. A Ghost in the Throat.
Well, I love finding a book like that. That is like, I would not have found that book other than you recommending it. It sounds really good. All of that too, like that process of becoming a new mother. And I think about that a lot. I'm like, I've written in nonfiction about my experience with motherhood. And I wrote in Neruda on the Park a lot about motherhood, but, you're making me now want to write more about it.
Yes, please, Cleyvis. And also that children's book about your experience with the librarians in Harlem. That is just begging for a children's book.
I know. It was really funny, actually. I always think about that as like a book that is, it's like inside me that it's like trying to come out, Admittedly, I haven't read as much in translation this year. And last year I had made myself a commitment like you that I was just going to read more in translation. Because one of the things that I think has happened to me over the years is that I'm like a fierce advocate for debut writers. And so I spend a lot of time like reading new writers, blurbing new writers, and just trying to support new writers because it's really so hard, especially if you're like a writer of color to like come up. Even to this day where like there have been so many doors that have been opened for new writers and new fiction, is still incredibly difficult. But I think what I realized, especially after my own debut came out, was that there's only so much time, right? And it's been really tough to like get new books in. So, that's something that I'm thinking a lot about with intention over the next year of like bringing back more translation. But one book that I can't stop thinking about that I now teach is Fernanda Tria's Pink Slime. Did you read that one?
No, I haven't.
This book is so good. So, okay, let me tell you. I'm so excited.
Tell me about it.
So it's dystopian. And we are meant to understand that we're like in a South American city. We don't know exactly which country. But it happens after there has been kind of like the collapse of society due to the climate crisis. And what is marked by this climate disaster is this kind of like pink, foamy atmosphere. And whenever like it rolls in, it's like a seaside city. And whenever it rolls in, people have to be like, just sequestered in their homes. Our protagonist has like a very difficult relationship with her mother, who lives a little bit out of the city. And she is the primary caretaker for a child that has special needs. And this child has a problem that he can't stop eating. There's something in his physiology that prevents him from feeling sated. She also has, she's broken up with her husband, who's hospitalized because he's gotten sick from the disease that contaminates people if they are caught in the bad weather. And so we see her kind of navigate the three relationships during the course of this time. And we understand that everything is escalating because people are being told they need to leave the city. It is now like becoming uninhabitable. And when I tell you that it's like one of those books that I read, and I read it because our good friend Angie Cruz was asked to blurb it. And she was like, you have to read this book. It's incredible. So anyway, it has kind of launched her career internationally. I think she was already a big figure in Latin America, but she is just a phenomenal writer. And I have to tell you, like that book, Pink Slime, for me is one of those books where I started teaching it because I think so much of like what's exciting to me about reading, especially reading Spanish books that have been translated into English, is that really the way that literature functions in Spanish is really different than the way that it functions in English, right? Like, I think that the environment becomes a propulsive element in literary fiction. I think like the contradictions of characters. I think that like here in the United States, we have a really difficult time with like complicated women or difficult women. And I find like I can't pick up a book that's been written in Spanish where like every female character isn't complicated or difficult, right? Like this idea that I feel like in some ways I find more comfort reading books that have been translated because I think they're like closer to the truth that I think like in some way like American literature has forced like the commercialism of literature.
Like the Steele did?
I think it has forced like a dullness. It has blunted the female character. And I don't think that's like, it's a generalization, obviously, because there's plenty of writers, both women and men, who are writing really intelligent books about women in all their complications. But I do find that, translation for me invites me to really subvert some of the things that, there's like a capitalistic side of me that's like, but I got to sell books. I got to sell, I got to make a living as a writer. And there's a part that I think like reading in translation kind of forces you to like, it like reminds us, right, that like we're here to tell the truth. We're here to like write books. And for me, it is important to write a book that's propulsive, that's page turning. But it's also like about the truth of our reality as human beings. And I feel like in reading books that are in other languages, I often find that this kind of thrilling effect of being like, oh, this is how you do it. This is how you tell a story. So what do you think for you, like translation kind of invites you to think about that? Maybe it gets you kind of out of the norm.
For me, it's an opportunity to allow myself to experience language in a different way, to stay longer with a certain feeling and elaborate it. Because for me, sometimes in my writing, I tend to be a little bit like cryptic or condensed. And I love it when writers can actually expand on it, which is something that when I was doing my MFA, my teachers were, but talk more about this. But okay, one sentence, but can you explore? Can you elaborate on it? So I think translating really allows me to see what elaborating looks like. And actually, it allows you a lot more material to work from. Even if at the end you only choose certain parts of it, you learn a lot more about what a particular image or event can yield. So that's what I love about translation. It's really an empathetic kind of endeavor where you're collaborating with someone, but you're also trying to understand how they're thinking, how they approach language. So I'm just really fascinated by it. And this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be a translator.
Oh, I love, well, you already are one. So that's the good news. Invite more of it. Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Well, this has been like a completely delightful conversation. I'm so glad that you took time to come hang out with us here at the Watchung Booksellers. I love talking to you about language and learning more about your process. I am so grateful that you translated my book. It has been like the biggest gift. But also, like I said, like now we're going to be best friends. So we got
book club.
Let's do it. But thank you again for coming and spending time with us. This was lovely.
Thank you, Cleyvis. My pleasure.
Thank you, Cleyvis and Erika, for coming in to talk with us. We love your work and your work together. Listeners, you can find information about their books and all of the books they mentioned on our podcast page at watchungbooksellers.com.
Tonight, February 3rd, we welcome journalist Scott Eden to discuss his true crime story, A Killing in Cannabis. He'll be in conversation with fellow true crime writer Joe Pompeo. On Thursday, January 5th, we welcome Anthony De Palma back to talk about his latest work, On This Ground, Hardship and Hope at the Toughest Prep School in America. He'll be talking with journalist Dale Russakoff.
And next Wednesday, February 11th, we are hosting Sadiqa Johnson for the release of her latest novel, The Keeper of Lost Children. Tickets are sold out for that one, but if you pre-order, we'll be sure to reserve a signed copy for you.
You can get details and tickets for all of our events, story times, and book clubs through our newsletter, show notes, or at watchungbooksellers.com. The Watchung Booksellers Podcast is produced by Catherine Council and Marnie Jessup, and it's recorded at Watchung Booksellers in Montclair, New Jersey. The show is edited by Catherine Council, and original music is composed and performed by Violet Muica. Research and show notes by Caroline Chertleff. Thank you to the staff at Watchung Booksellers and the Kids Room for all their hard work and love of books.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoy the show, please like, follow, and share it. You can follow us on social media at Watchung Booksellers. And if you have any questions or ideas, you can reach us at wbpodcast@watchungbooksellers.com.
We'll see you next time. Until then, for the love of books, keep reading.